My name is Ernesto Todd Mireles. I'm the faculty at Prescott College. I teach primarily ethnic studies, Chicano studies, and community organizing. I'm in the process of building a critical communications department at Prescott. I think mostly what I've been thinking about a lot lately is how different things are than when I was a kid. And I suppose that could really be true. I mean, anybody could say that, and that could be true. But I think that there are certain moments in time when things change so rapidly that it's kind of hard for society to keep up with the changes, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, I was born in 1966, and I was born at what people would probably consider really the tail end of the civil rights movement, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, even if we look at like 1970 or 71 or 72 as kind of like the highlight, the pinnacle, of the whole thing. But by that time, the Civil Rights Act had been, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, they had all been passed. Malcolm X was dead. Martin Luther King would die and be assassinated in 1968. I mean, I was 2 years old when he was assassinated. Affirmative action was a thing, and it was a thing for my entire life. It was a thing. And then, somewhere around, so I grew up in this world, right, where I think that people had a lot of hope about racial equity and that things were better than they had been. Like that was a real narrative, for me going through like public education. And I think it was for a lot of people who are my age, which I think is one of the reasons why, like, people who are in my generation, I think that a lot of them are really I think they're kind of shell shocked, because they're just like, what the fuck just happened, And so, I mean, it's like, it's like Nazis marching in the street. Like, I mean, it was unbelievable is what it was. It was unbelievable. And I was just like, how did that happen? I mean, obviously they have to be opposed and, they have to be smashed and, all those things. But the question has always been, what's going on here? And so I think that, I think that for myself, I grew up in a very racially diverse family. My mom was white. My biological father was Mexican. My stepfather was black. I mean, we were just really diverse family. And I think even for the time, you're talking about, the early 70s, right? That was kind of, it was a little uncommon. And so, growing up that way, I think it became really apparent to me, early on that, people are people, right? And that's just, I mean, people are just people. Some people are black, some people are brown, some people are white, but they're still my dad, or they're still my mom, or they're my grandparents, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, and it always, even when I was a kid, it always kind of surprised me. It did surprise me. The fuss that people would make about like skin color and stuff like that, right? And it's not that I didn't get it, but I didn't get it, Right. And so I think from very early on, there was a lot of that. And it wasn't, my parents were never talking about, I mean, they never talked about like social justice or like politics, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, my parents didn't talk about things like that. And it's not that they were against them. They just didn't talk about them. I mean, you could probably argue that they lived it, right? But I don't think that there was anything political in their mind about them getting together, right? Now, I think that my mom is an extraordinary race trader. I mean, it just, it's crazy, but I don't think she ever thought of it like that, And so, so when I was growing up, and I mean, like, I mean, like junior high and before, right? The house was always full of books, and there were 3 books. Now there were 4 books that I remember reading by the time I was in junior high school. And one of them was this book by this lady named Carolyn Merce, who was a school teacher in New York. And the name of the book was Can't You Hear Me Talking to You? And it was all of these essays that she had collected from her students in inner city, like New York, Manhattan, Harlem, like around there, right? And so remembering too that at that time, New York wasn't like it is now. I mean, it was, in, monumental decay, right? And so, I mean, these, and I was reading these, I was young. I was like, 11, 12 years old. And I was reading this book, and I was just, and that book really captured my imagination. And then around the same time, I read the autobiography of Dick Gregory. And the title of that book is Nigger. And it's his autobiography. And I don't know if you know who Dick Gregory is or not. So Dick Gregory was a comedian. He was a very famous comedian who became a part of the civil rights movement. You should look him up. But I was real young when I read that book too. And then there was another book called Great Speeches of American Protest. It was weird. I mean, we did a lot of reading back then because, there weren't any computers or anything, right? So, like, a book was like your computer, And, but I read this speech by this guy named Mario Salvo, who was part of the free speech movement at Berkeley back in the 50s, right? And it's that whole speech about, like, the workings of the machine and how they're so odious that sometimes, we have to press our flesh and our bones into the gears of the machine to make it stop working or whatever. It's a great speech, right? But I was probably like 12. And then I read Roots, right, by Alex Haley, which just blew me away as a little kid. And I think that, as a child, like those were formative moments for me. I mean, there's a lot of other things that happened, but I can honestly say I've thought about it a lot over the years. Those 4 books, I read those 4 books probably by the time that I was 13 years old. And I think that they imprinted on me, right? And they like set a path. So, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think it's, it's my family. I think that, the way it was made up. And in my house, you could read anything that you wanted to. I mean, my mom was always very clear about that. I mean, if it was a book, we were allowed to read it. And so, I mean, I read a lot of things probably that some people might consider not entirely age appropriate, but I fucking read them anyways. Yep. So, yeah.
There's this idea of art sort of mirroring society, right? And then there's this idea of art transforming society, that it's like a counterculture. I'm just curious if you could speak to that. I'm not really sure how I'm asking the question, but...
Well, I think you're asking it pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that... You got more you want? Okay.
That's all, yeah.
I think that the answer to... The short answer to that question is yes. Mm-hmm. That's the short answer to that question.
Of course. Yeah.
I think that... art does both things. It mirrors, society. But I think that it also simultaneously transforms it. Mm-hmm. I think that it's naive of us to think in terms of like critical analysis. that when we look at something, that we're not changing it, right? And so what I mean by that is this, is that it doesn't mean that we're physically changing it, right? But when you look at something, when you look at a thing like this, right, which we know as a spoon, okay, and it's a spoon, right? But I can sharpen its edges and I could turn it into a knife. I could use it to dig. I mean, I could put it over my eye like this and walk around like, I'm Captain Spoonhook or something like that, right? I mean, the point being that that material objects have multiple. They have multiple uses and multiple meanings, right? There's nothing authentic or essential about those, and I think it's the same thing, with art, right? I mean, art means something different throughout time, right? I mean, like we look at the Mona Lisa, okay? I mean, I guess it's a great painting, I mean, I don't think it's a bad painting, right? Why is it the world's most famous painting? I don't know.
And it wasn't in the day when
it was not. It was just a painting of this lady, right? But time and other things have changed the meaning of the painting, and I think that that's what we also, really need to understand about art, is that art is the reflection of a moment, and it has to be understood when it's created within that moment. I think that if what we're talking about are things like great art or, fantastic art or, whatever, it's, these are objects, or these are ideas, or the art portrays, an ideology that transcends the moment, but not necessarily transcends the moment in the sense that it means the same thing always, that it always means the same thing, right? But that it transcends the moment in a way that other people are able to look at it and fit it into the moment that they're in, right? That's what really makes it great, right? That's how art transforms. That's part of the way that art transforms. I think the other thing is that language, right, as wonderful as it is, is limited, right? And it's limited by our ability to understand each other, not necessarily our ability to articulate, but our ability to understand. And I think that one of the things that art does is it allows us to let other people see what it is we are thinking. And as a result, then does something that language cannot do, right? It cannot, language can't fully express. You can't fully express. But I think that art, that's why poetry is so stunning, right? Because poetry doesn't try to, it doesn't try to write a big giant sentence, right? It evokes thoughts and ideas, through specific like phrasing, right? And I think that that's what makes it so powerful. So yeah, I mean, art transforms and it mirrors, and it does those things simultaneously. And I think that it's also, what's also really important about that is that people understand, because I think that we have a hard time with this in our society right now, that two things can be true at the same time, right? And that, as a result of that, and I think that we should be glad that that's true, I mean, because then, I mean, if it's not true, then we get into this, into the area of metaphysics, right? Where things are, have an essential nature, and then we think about something like God, that never changes, right? God is unchanging. I mean, how fucking terrifying is that?
Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, I wonder sometimes if Christians really, if they've really actually thought about that, that God God does not change, and it's like, wow. I mean, what does that mean? And so, but art changes. I think that, I think that theater, like live theater is the whole show. And I think that it's kind of like, it's like when we talk to each other as opposed to like when we write things down, I think that there's a lot of direct brain stuff that's happening and stuff. I don't know I think something and then I say it, right? I mean, this is what you're hearing come out of my mouth, I think is the closest that you and I can come to experiencing pure thought, right? I think that, I think that theater plays that same role for us in terms of storytelling. I also think that it's very endangered, right? And I don't think it's endangered because movies or anything like that are a superior art form. I think they're a different art form. And I think to compare them is a mistake, because they do two very different things, right? And it's like you alluded to in asking your question. I mean, a film becomes codified, right? And because the film is going to be the exact same way every time, And so, I mean, in terms of critiquing the film, I mean, what we also have to understand in some ways, or to guess at, I think is probably the only thing that we can do, are not just the artist's intention in how it is that they portray the character, but the director's intention in where they make certain cuts or scenes that get left in or get put, get left out or whatever. And so there's multiple layers. Now you could say the same thing with theater in the sense that, there's a director. I think theater's a little bit different in the sense that, actors are reacting to each other, spontaneously, and that every time you go to see the film or the play or the theater is done, it's going to be done differently. There's somebody's going to say a line differently, or there's going to be a word that's left out. And I mean those become, that becomes sort of a reality of it, right? So I think that in terms of propaganda, though, I would have to say that I don't think that it necessarily has anything to do with ignorance. I do think it has to do with the way that stories are perpetuated, right? But that's partially how I would answer that. So the reason that I say that is because all of these stories do the same thing that the art that we were talking about a second ago do, right? I mean, art attempts to explain the human situation. I believe that 100%, and I think that it's the same thing with stories, right? Mm-hmm. Stories attempt to explain the human situation. And so, whether it's a play about, some housewife who, just all of a sudden realizes, when her crazy Victorian husband comes home, right, that, this isn't for her. You know what I'm saying? And she just like walks out the door, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's life, man. Mm-hmm. People's old ladies leave them, right? Mm-hmm. People's old men, they leave, and they leave and they leave the kids. And, I mean, that's life, right? I think that what the theater does, I think it's what movies try to do, but I don't think movies are different, right? Mm-hmm. But it really trying to like give you a snapshot of like what people are thinking, right? So like, in movies, you don't get that internal dialogue as much, right? You don't get the to be or not to be. That is the question, and it's just like, oh shit, this motherfucker's thinking about killing himself. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, in a movie, they have to like do something that like shows that they're thinking about killing
Right.
themselves, you know,
Yeah.
which I think is just different, you know. Is it inferior or superior? I don't know, but it's different, you know. And so I think yeah, I think that as a species, you know, we sleep, we eat, we have sex with each other, and we take a shit. And I think after we get done with all of that, then we make up stories about it. You know, so I think that, I think that stories are like, I mean, after we fulfill those basic human functions, then what we think to ourselves is, I wonder why I just did that. You know,
Yeah.
why did I just take a shit? You know, or why? Well, it's from the food, you know, and then the food comes from blah, blah, blah. Or why do I find this person, well, I don't know. I mean, we would say sexually attractive, right? But like, what explains that, you know?
Right.
And I think, yeah. So I think that's what I think. But I think that we do, we make propaganda. That's the next thing that we do. And then we make art, you know, and then somebody draws something on a wall and somebody says, what is that? And he says, oh, that's the sun. And I mean, how fucking brilliant was that guy?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, seriously, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh no, it's not, it's the sun in the sky. And everybody's all like, what do you mean it's the sun in the sky? You know, he's like, it's the sun in the sky. And then he's like, bow down to it, right? And then they're all like, and then he's like, you know what? Actually, bring me some food because the sun in the sky told me to tell you that you need to bring me some food, and then you bow down to it, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, you can totally see how it happens, you know? And so, because they got an answer for it. People want answers.
Right. Surrealism. I am super, super inspired by surrealist artists in general. Someone who I watched in high school, who was recommended to me by a screenwriter, Alejandro Jodorowsky. And I was just, for one, pretty young, so it was impactful. But I was just really blown away with how he's able to communicate oppression in such an abstract way, where there's very little dialogue. It's very graphic. And I guess my question is, how does he do that? Because, you know...
Because he's a fucking genius?
He's a genius. Because, I see this also, I don't know if you're familiar with Bread and Puppet.
No.
Which is, they're like a political puppet circus up in Vermont. And, you know, also very, you know, communicating oppression through abstract pieces. And I suppose, so my question is, how can surrealism articulate oppression, and how can it misconstrue? Because I think a lot of people see something like Alejandro Jodorowsky or Bread and Puppet, and they're just more confused or more. It's creating the opposite sort of. Not that the director or the artist has a particular intention of how the audience should feel, but I think that there is an intention generally to start a dialogue, to have the audience question what they're seeing, and when is that effective, and when is that just causing more confusion, I guess, is sort of.
So I think that there's a pivotal moment, right, in all of this that has to do with mechanical reproduction, right, and you know, it has to do with mechanical reproduction in the arts, and it has to do with mechanical reproduction in terms of like, you know, mechanization and all of that, right? And it's really around the turn of the 18th century. It's like right at the end of the 18th century. You know, England's has gone through its industrial revolution. The United States is about to go through its industrial revolution. And there's an essay that I think, if you haven't read, I think that you should, and I think it will be helpful. It's called Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. It's by a guy named Walter Benjamin. And I don't know if you're familiar with that at all or not.
title sounds familiar.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's worth a read.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't think it's like a smoking gun for you or anything, but I think it's fodder for thought. I mean, I really do, especially along these lines right here. The point being this is that, I think it's important to look at what realism is, to be able to understand, surrealism. I think it's also important to understand, why, like Picasso and abstractionism and cubism and all of that, really are taking off around this time. And that's because up until that moment, right, in history, artists, I don't think that anybody really argued about whether or not artists, whether or not it was realistic. You know what I'm saying? Like, they painted what they saw, and, but when you take a picture of something, right, now you really have a picture of what it is that you see. There is no artist that can paint a picture that looks like a photograph, right? And so it shifts the whole, and this is where it's still the same, they're using the same medium, right? But the meaning of the medium shifts, And so, I mean, yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part I don't think that's a big part of it. I'm positive that's a big part of it. The other thing that's also a big part of it, and I don't think that people talk about enough, well, I don't think that they do anyways, is at the same time, this is when Freud is really coming out with his ideas of, like, the subconscious and, the partitioning of the mind into the id, the ego, and the superego, and all that kind of stuff. And so the whole idea that there might be something in your mind, or that the whole idea that you didn't know your entire mind, that didn't exist before Freud, And so it's, I think that all of these things have to, really be taken into account. And I'll tell you one other thing that I think is super important that people really, and I kind of get it because of the way that history's taught. History's taught very fragmented, is World War I. World War I is, an international war, right, that claimed over 25 million lives all over the globe, right? Nothing like that had ever happened before, And this is where the full brunt of mechanization is brought out to slaughter entire populations, right? I mean, now we see that and we're all like, damn, I'm glad I'm not there. I mean, but then people were just like, what the fuck is going on? And so, this is where, like, when you talk about surrealism, right? I mean, a lot of the people like Dali and Luis Buñuel and all these other people, I mean, they're coming out of these different, other surrealist movements like Dadaism, and exploring, like, exploring the sort of, the insanity, right, of the world, and thinking about it. I mean, this is a real moment for art too. And so I think, that surrealism does those things. I think that it challenges reality. I think that it also sort of names it at the same time, and really making it appear as I think it exposes the perverseness of reality of the world that we live in. So yeah, and I think Jodorowsky does a good job with that. I think that he is. I think he's a crazy dude, man. I mean, I really do. I know that that's all like, oh yeah, he's a crazy dude. I mean, I think he's a crazy dude, man. I think he's a little touched, And yeah, I've seen all his movies. Holy Mountain, I think is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think the way that they break the fourth wall at the end is also very fitting, as you know, that shot where they pull back on the whole scene. And I mean, it's, I think it's just a way of like exposing the watched being watched, and then their understanding that they're being watched, yeah. I also think that it's important to remember that, he's clearly Latin American. The role that magical realism plays in all of that, I think is super important too. His movie, El Topo, I mean, that's totally, in my mind anyways, that's a good example of magical realism. I think they all are in some ways. Yeah. But like Holy Mountain, that's some straight up fantasy shit that's going on there. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of sort of like, the equivalent of what we have here in the States. I'm thinking of David Lynch and not so much communicating oppression necessarily, but also very, abstract. And again, it's like, what am I supposed to be getting from this? What am I taking with me? Not that you need to define what it is you see. It's probably better if you don't try to. Especially with art, but
yeah, I mean,
it can be good to analyze a little. There's a time for that, So.
Well, I think that where we run into trouble is when we try to say something's good or bad, right? Yeah. Because I'm not really sure. I'm not sure that's the point. Because and if that is the point, then I would argue that that's a different project. Right. I mean, that's not what, I don't think that's what you or I are talking about right now.
Yeah.
And so I think, so when we get into all this critical acclaim and all this other kind of stuff, I mean, I think that it's super important to critique the shit out of it. But the minute that somebody says, I think this is good or I think this is bad, I don't really care what if they think it's good or if it's bad. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in what they think it means.
How can surrealism serve to articulate oppression, and how might it cause division or miscommunication?
I don't think that it's necessarily the job of surrealism to do that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that it is. I don't think that's part of that project. Mm-hmm. I think that. And I get this is where the commercial corruption of it could come in very, very easily, but I think that, and it's the same thing like with Jodorowsky and all of these other people. There's a way to make a movie, right? And then there's a way to not make a movie, And I think that there's the same way to make a painting, to think about all these different things, right? So like you think about the first surrealistic movie, the short, the Dali Buñuel Un Chien Andalou, right? Like you think about that piece, okay? And you think about what they're doing with it. I mean, are they addressing oppression in there? I'm not really sure, that they are. I think that what they are doing, though, is addressing, or they're attempting to address the human situation. Mm. And I think that anytime you talk about humanity or you talk about the human condition, that you are addressing oppression. Mm. Or it's at least a part of the conversation. Right? Definitely. Because there's no way to talk about being human without talking about oppression. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and so I observe this sort of competitive nature to activism here, or social justice. That there's a lot of ego involved in it, and I think that's also the cancel culture fuels that. We call each other out more than we actually have a conversation about who's offended and how we can be more respectful. It's just like, you fucked up, and I'm gonna make you feel really shitty about it.
Yeah.
And I'm more woke than you, or whatever. Like,
yeah.
Wokeness is the problem.
Wokeness is a problem. Yeah, it is.
So, and yeah, I see that a lot here. And so I'm coming back to this just in the way that we're presented and the way that we're taught. How can it be less desensitizing? And you know, I read an article which I wish I had read before starting college here, The Crisis of Pity, and the way that
you should send it to me.
Yeah,
please send it to me. I love the title.
Yeah, it's about how the way that we communicate oppression in, say, liberal arts schools or really anywhere in society is really polarizing. Please
send it to me.
Yeah. It's to the point of, you know, where the oppressed is objectified, and we pity more than we feel compassion to act. And also just the desensitization of feeling like, oh, I don't want to see that. I don't want to look at that. So that brings me to my question, which is, what makes violence and, you know, graphic imagery necessary in communicating oppression, and how can it be desensitizing, and how, where is that line? How do you balance that for, you know?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question, man. I don't I don't think that violence and graphic violence. You said violence and graphic something.
Graphic imagery.
Graphic imagery. I don't think it is necessary to communicate oppression. Right. I don't think it's necessary at all. I also don't think that it's totally inappropriate. Right.
Right.
I think it depends on how you want to tell the story. I think that's a big part of it. I think that it's important to people are obsessed with what they think the truth is, right? And I think that the violence and the graphic imagery is it can be a way of perpetuating victimhood. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Look at what you did to my people, all that kind of stuff, right? What I think that a lot of people don't understand, or they don't believe, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would be like, you know what the fuck you're talking about. They would say that to me, is that actually people say that to me all the time. Some people make a living off of it, telling me I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. The point is that it's all a recentering of whiteness, right? Mm-hmm. And it just is. Okay, yeah, sure, whatever, man. White people came, blah, blah, blah. They did all these things. It's absolutely 100% true. I mean, you guys, people stand up and they say, oh, we want to, recognize that we're on Apache land. Okay, great. You just recognized that, right? What did that change? Not a single fucking thing. You know what I mean? And so, you can recognize it from here until, the end of the world, right? But, there's something that's missing here, because I think even in recognizing in these land recognitions that what we're constantly doing is refocusing or recentering whiteness. I think it's almost impossible for brown people in this country to have a political discussion about themselves without referencing white oppression. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And so, it's there, right? It's absolutely 100% there. Okay. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And I ask this question to people all the time. What are you going to do about it? You going to go shoot yourself some white folks? Mm-hmm. You going to start a revolution? What are you going to do? And then I tell them, okay, think about it this way. Let's take white people out of the equation, right? Okay, white people don't matter anymore. Okay, Now what are you going to do? They really don't know what they're going to do then, right? So I think that, you know, when we see all these things, what happens is that we think to ourselves, oh, that's gross, or oh, I'm disturbed by that, you know, or like, I don't understand why they had to, you know, show that guy getting his head cut off, you know. I mean, okay, I mean, I don't understand it either, right? But I mean, if they're showing all that to prove a point, and the point is that white people are bad, right? Aren't we just still fucking talking about white people?
Yeah.
All the time, all the motherfucking time. That's what we do. Like, we can't stop ourselves from talking about white folks. We love it, right? They're so mean to me and they're so bad. And, you know, and I'm just like, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with any of those things. I think, well, you know what I mean? Like, you know, in general, right? Like, or in history, right? Like, clearly, you know, we got an issue here, okay? But rehashing that fucking thing over and over and over and over again without ever thinking about what we're going to do for the future, you know, people talking about decolonize your diet or decolonize your desk, or you know what I'm saying? And it's just like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Decolonization is a process of national liberation where people who are oppressed in a settler colonial or in a colonial situation, right, throw off the oppression of the colonizer. Well, they don't do that by changing their diet, right? They don't do that by like cleaning their fucking room. You can't Marie Kondo colonizers out of a country, right? I mean, and then the question even becomes really, and I think this is a totally legitimate question in 2021. Where are you going to go? I mean, we are all fucking stuck here together, you know, I mean, but that's what I think about that. That's what I think about that violence. Like that imagery. That is actually really what I think about it. That's a good question. That's actually a question that I spent quite a bit of time thinking about, right? Because I'm just like, how many more ways are we going to like glorify these motherfuckers? Exactly. You know, I mean, it's just like, yeah, you know, every way. That's like Quentin Tarantino, man. Everybody thinks that he's such a good fucking filmmaker. I fucking hate Quentin Tarantino. He is a cocky, arrogant, ugly ass motherfucker, right? Who basically has made his entire career off of copying films made by people of color in other fucking countries. And then he brings it back here and everybody's like, he's a fucking genius. I'm like, no, he's a fucking thief. You know, why do you go see his movies? I don't go see his movies. I mean, my wife was a big fan of Quentin Tarantino, and she dragged me to that stupid fucking movie, The Hateful Eight, you know, and we were in there, and I started counting how many times they said the word bitch and how many times they said the word nigger. And when I got to 100, I said, really? I looked at her and I said, really? I said, you think this is a good movie? And she said, no, I think this movie is trash, you know. And I said, and I asked her, I said, do you want to leave? And she said, no, we just spent $30. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. You know, I'm gonna watch the end of this. So at least when I go out and say this movie fucking blew my ass, then I'll be able to say, no, I sat through it. I paid my money. I sat through it. This is my opinion. Yeah. You know, I think that every one of his films is exactly the same, man. I looked at Django and I was just like, what is this? What is this? You know, it's just, it was like a giant snuff film, man. You know, actually, when you think about gore and you think about all this violence and everything like that, I don't even think it's in Hollywood, man. You know where the real problem is right now is in these 2-minute murder videos that are on Twitter, where they're just people just filming these cops just fucking killing these black guys, man. I mean, over and over and over and over again. I mean, that's a fucking snuff film, dude. Right? I mean, those are illegal. I mean, and you know, so and some people will argue, well, it's bringing justice to people. What justice is there? Yeah, where is this justice that you speak of? You know what I'm saying? Like, how have things changed? You know, I mean, justice. I mean, is our sense of justice so diminished, so perverted, so warped that we think that's fucking justice? That's not fucking justice. Somebody walking up to Derek Chauvin when he has his knee on George Floyd's neck and putting a fucking bullet in his brain, that's fucking justice, right? Not like, oh, we're going to take him to trial and then argue for 3 weeks about whether or not he did the right fucking thing. That's not justice. And then at the same time, millions of people are watching these videos, black and white, right? Because it's not just black people that are watching those. It's all these fucking crazy ass motherfuckers like Kyle Rittenhouse and Dylan Roof who are watching it, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to get me one just like that motherfucker did. You know? I mean, no, this is that right there. That is, and if that's not recentering whiteness, then I don't know what it is. You know, this isn't about demanding justice from the system. There will be no justice from this system, right? That is, if that's your goal, then you're already fucked. Yeah. You know, and so, I mean, thinking about, and I think that's the role that art plays. That's the role, is to think about how it is that we agitate, you know, the masses of people, and what is the message that we're putting into their brains without even having to say a word to them, you know?
Absolutely.
That's what I think.
Yeah. I've been doing a bit of research on the, just communism in general and the history of communism. And particularly I've been looking at the first, second, third, fourth international. What is the fifth international look like in the 21st century?
That's a good question.
You know, I feel like, you know, you could say, and maybe I shouldn't say, but I feel like there are small manifestations of global solidarity happening with Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's pretty significant. I don't know if I'd call it an international, you know. It's not a strike, it's not a, you know, I mean, I'm hopeful that we're moving towards that. I feel hopeful, like, just within the past, you know, few years. But yeah, I think that art is going to play a really critical role in building international solidarity, because, I think it's such a better way to communicate oppression than posting videos of people being murdered, and even you know, I've been writing a lot about this and blogging, and I'm just sort of wondering what your thoughts are on art as a tool of global solidarity, and how to pursue that as a, you know, and I also want to add, I think that art is a really great way for people that and I'm thinking about students at this school that have really confine themselves to the binary perspective of what's happening, where it's like cancel culture versus, you know, the right, and this feeling of like, I can't participate in global solidarity, social justice, because I'm a white American, and anything I say could be held against me. I'm gonna say something wrong, and someone's going to cancel me. So I just won't say anything at all, you know, which is worse. Yeah. You know, it's
totally worse.
So I think art is a great way to get past that feeling of trepidation and that you're going to say the wrong thing. It doesn't matter. Art.
Who the fuck doesn't say the wrong thing sooner or later, right? Exactly. I mean, I've said a whole bunch of things in this that are probably the wrong thing to say, you know? I mean, I think... I think that for white activists, that the minute that they understand that it's not about them being white, like all of the things that are happening has nothing to do with whether or not they're white, right? As soon as they understand that, then I think they're ready to begin to make a contribution, right? I also think that that's true of people who aren't white, right? As soon as they're willing to have a conversation about their political goals that don't have to do with complaining about white folks, then they're ready to make a contribution also, right? Mm-hmm. And so, many years ago, man, I was watching this Larry King interview with Louis Farrakhan. And I was watching it because he was interviewing Farrakhan, right? And this was a long time ago, man, back in the 90s sometime. And, Larry King asked Farrakhan if he was ever going to run for president, that there had been rumors that he was going to run for president, right? And Farrakhan started laughing. And he told him, I moved a long time ago. I moved beyond the desire to be the black manager of a white reality, right? And I was just like, damn, Louis Farrakhan. Wow. I was just like, I was, probably in my 20s. How old are you?
21.
I was probably about your age, like when I heard him say that, somewhere around your age, right? And that shit blew me away, dude. I was just like, what does that mean? I was just like, I don't really understand what he just said, but at the same time, I understand that he just fucking rocked Larry King. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I was just like, yeah, the black manager of a white reality. And clearly, obviously, I've never forgotten that moment, right? It's like 30 some years later. Mm-hmm. And I'm still thinking about it, even to this day. I still think about, what it is that means. But I understand that Farrakhan, Farrakhan was right. Wasn't right about, he's not right about everything, but he was right about that. And it's also just goes to show, how two things can be right at the same time. He's so right about some stuff and so terribly wrong about other things. I think that's the that's the part of it. And it's not, I don't think about, losing fear or, fear of saying the wrong thing or, anything like that. You have to give up being white. You have to give up being white. And you have to give it up in your mind, and I think that it means that, wow. I think it means that you should probably have little brown babies with somebody, you know what I'm saying? And like do everything within your power to erase what that means, not to constantly bring it up, but just to let it go. Mm-hmm. What's more powerful? Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa, or just saying, that's not who I am. And then you just fucking walk away from it, right? Mm-hmm. And you give up that privilege to the extent that you can, mm-hmm. Right. Even my mom, who has spent her entire adult life with non-white people, right? Mm-hmm. She's in her 70s now. She spent from the time that she was 16, when she met my dad, until now. She spent her entire adult life with non-white people, but she still looks white, mm-hmm. And when she gets around other white people, they say the craziest things in front of her, and she's always like, she's always calling them out. She's always just like, I don't know who the fuck you're talking to or who you think you're talking about, yeah. Or, that kind of thing. Right. But yeah. And I don't think that she did any of that. It wasn't a political statement, right? It's just who she was, yeah. But I think that's a big part of it. White people have got to think about how to give up being white.
This is something that, I feel like travel is so important, seeing a different culture can be very informative. I went to Nepal during my gap years, and when I was there, I hadn't gone to Prescott College yet, so I hadn't learned much about colonialism or cancel culture, and everything that goes with that. But my goal during that trip was like to just try to not think about my American identity, like mm-hmm. my white identity, and like just to sort of be there and be experiencing it. And now I feel like when people travel, they're hyper aware of their skin color and their nationality, because they're afraid that, like, I don't want to be racist. I don't want to look like I'm cultural appropriating, or something, you know, like the self-policing when we travel, just so that we don't look racist. I don't know. I think that's just so harmful. You know, you have to let go of your, you know. Yes, it's there. Like it's there, dictating how you see. But I think if you have an intention of just forgetting like what you think you know about culture, you know, and when you travel, is like I wish people could have the experience that I had traveling, you know, because I think that would just be very helpful for people that are so fixed in their cultural perspectives of the world, and you know, yeah.
Well, they don't allow themselves to be a human being, right? And to experience. They don't allow themselves to experience the world around them as a human, right? They're either experiencing it, you know, solely as a white person, you know, who's either superior over everybody, or who is, you know, a colonizer,
right.
You know, and a bad person. You know what I'm saying? Or, you know, we experience, you know, all of the things around us as, you know, thinking of ourselves, you know, strictly within our, you know, perceived skin color, you know what I'm saying? Or like, you know, that we're a person of color, and therefore, you know, that we're, you know, I mean, we're colonized, we're oppressed, you know? And I mean, all of those things are true. And it's also true that we're human beings, you know, and that the only way that we're going to break out of this is, I think this is the only way we're going to break out of it, is when people are willing to embrace their own humanity, you know, and to really, yeah, I mean, there's going to be some things that people are just going to have to let go, you know, brown people and white people, you know, they're just going to have to let them go, you know. I mean, and I think it's going to be hard, man. It's going to be hard to let go of perceptions of superiority and, you know, this belongs to me, and, you know, all that. I mean, it's going to be hard to let that go, you know, and it's going to be hard to let go the trauma of defeat and, you know, being conquered, and, you know, and all that. But I mean, we either let it go, we either find a way to let it go, we come to some sort of an accord, or you know, we're just going to end up destroying each other.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's reflected, you know, in the environment, you know, in the way that we're using up the resources of this world. I mean, there is a winner take all mentality that took hold of this planet about 500 years ago, and the indigenous people of this continent have bore the brunt of it, or at least initially, but that the entire world is bearing the brunt of it now, you know, and it's, you know, we're all going to die from it, right? So thinking about it in that way, I mean, yeah, but we have to, brown people have to stop recentering whiteness, and white people have to stop recentering whiteness, because apologizing for being white, that's recentering whiteness. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
You know, and the sooner people really understand that, I mean, the faster we can get on. I mean, I don't want to hear any more white people apologize about being white. I just don't want to hear it. I'm just like, doesn't feel real. Yeah, doesn't feel real to me, you know. So, I mean, you know, there's other things that we could all apologize to each other about, but how can you apologize? You know, you can't apologize about where you were born. You can apologize for everything you do afterwards, but you know, like, you can't.
Yeah. The other
You're white.
Like,
you know,
white activism is like this, a drive of like redemption. You know, that's like, don't you want to just do this because like we're human and like we're compassionate, or we should be. Like, I think that is like really problematic, is in that like I won't feel ashamed to be white if I can help you, which is, you know, I think that's been a very embedded narrative in like.
Oh, it's problematic.
You know.
It's also problematic too, because I mean, how do they know anybody wants their fucking help?
Right. Exactly.
You know, I mean, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of a whole bunch of things that you could do for me, but do I need your help? I don't know if I need your help.
Right.
You know, like, I mean, what is it that I need your help for? Do I need your help figuring out how to like overcome this situation? You know, I mean, what am I not? I mean, are you saying that I'm not equal to that? You know,
Right.
and saying I'm gonna help you. I mean, I'm not saying you can't help. I'm just saying, why does that make you feel better about yourself?
Right.
You know, and it's yeah, that's interesting.